Hey everybody, Gromos here with another War Thunder Simulator battle video. So this time I got something a bit more turnfight focused again. I thought with its recent battle rating reduction I'd take a look at the Spitfire Mark 5C. So let me give you a quick overview of the plane before we take a look at a few battles in it. Now, the Mark 5 was, like the Mark 9 after it, initially thought to be a stopgap measure, which then became one of the main variants of the fighter. It is based on the earlier Mark 1 and 2s, with the biggest difference being the fitting of a Merlin 45 engine and some structural improvements. Now, the Merlin 45 engine is similar to the Merlin 20 fitted in Hurricane Mark II, but a bit simplified and has only a single-speed super instead of a two-speed of the Merlin 20, so the Mark 5 will reach its optimal performance only in a relatively narrow altitude band, about 3,500 meters. Now, as far as power goes, eventually the Merlin 45 could reach between 1,480 and 1,500 horsepower at this optimal altitude at about 16 psi boost pressure. Those are the numbers the engine is most well known for. However, early in its production life, the engine was limited to a maximum of only 12 psi boost. That is not uncommon for fighter engines to be initially restricted until a few quirks are worked out. A similar thing was true for the DB605A engine as well, for example. However, in War Thunder we can in most cases, though not all, make use of the full potential of the engine. The Mark 5 is however one of the exceptions. It is only running at its early 12 psi boost settings, and is therefore at optimal altitude missing about 180 to 200 horsepower compared to what it would do with the full 16 psi boost. Now, that leads to a funny situation with the Mark 5B, because on lower altitude its engine power is almost identical to that of the 2B, whose Merlin 12 is not restricted to early engine settings, and even at its optimal altitude, the Mark 5 in its current form in War Thunder only manages to put out about 20 horsepower more than the 2B at its optimal altitude, which is a few hundred meters lower. The Mark 5 being optimized for slightly higher altitude can keep up its power a bit better at higher altitude, but it never really manages more than 40 horsepower over the 2B even at higher altitudes. The Spitfire Mark 5 is however, thanks to the new engine and other modifications, quite a bit heavier than the 2B. And that means that as far as flight performance is concerned, the 5B in War Thunder is worse than the 2B, that comes before it at most things. Speed is about the same, but acceleration and climb rate is worse on the heavier Mark 5, and being heavier it also turns less well than the 2B, loses more energy in the turn, and thanks to the worse power to weight ratio, takes longer to regain lost energy. With the armament of the 5B also being the same, there is little reason to fly the 5B with its current engine settings over the 2B. But what about the 5C? Well, one would expect the 5C being later and higher in battle rating by quite a bit despite its recent reductions to run the proper late engine settings, but it does not. It is also limited to 12 psi and as a matter of fact produces the exact same horsepower than the 5B at all altitudes. So again, when it comes to flight performance, the 5C is usually not any better than the 2B. However, the 5C has a way better armament, 4 Hispano cannons instead of 2 and more ammo per gun for them. And that is what makes the 5C interesting, despite its lackluster engine performance. It is of course still a Spitfire, so it will turn well. Not as good as the Mark II, but better than the Mark 9, so you get a very good turner with heavy armament. Of course, the Mark 5 turns better than everything on the German side, but in this video we have the Japanese again as opponents. Here we have Zeros, which of course turn better, but are slightly slower, and the Mark 5 is still maneuverable enough to put up a good defensive if necessary. The Mark 5 does turn better than the Hayabusa 3 Otsu, though the Hayabusa rolls better. But what you have to keep in mind is that the Spitfire will lose energy a lot faster in turns thanks to its heavier weight, and has a lower power to weight ratio than a Hayabusa, so it will regain energy slower. So while you can turn after Hayabusa 3 in your Mark 5, you don't want this engagement to take too long, so not to lose too much energy. And if at all possible, you want to have a bit of altitude to get some speed back if you get too slow. In general, with the Mark 5, I would suggest to stick close to your team. With its good turn rate and armament, it is great to get enemy planes or friendlies fast, and it is maneuverable enough to often keep attackers at bay and distracted long enough for someone to get them off your tail if you are under attack. Of course, working with your team is always advisable, but especially so when flying a plane that may not have the speed to get out of tight spots on its own. Also try to enter a fight with as much energy as possible, since the Mark V will lose it fast in a furball. So let's take a look at 2 battles in the Mark V. Here we are on the Guadalcanal map. And soon after I spawn into this game I can already see a fight close to the friendly fleet. It is on a little lower altitude, so I can build up a bit of speed while approaching, and the plan is simply to use that speed and the Mark V's good maneuverability and armament to get as many enemy planes or friendlies as fast as possible before the Spitfire runs too low on speed. I at first see a Hayabusa I go after, but it is finished off by a Typhoon before I can get there, and I loop around to look for more targets. As I pull up again I can see a Zero pass below me and go after another friendly plane, so I roll around and go after it. My Spitfire is a bit sluggish at first, the high speed reducing its maneuverability a bit, but after I slow down a bit I can slot in behind the Zero and fire a burst at close range that sets it on fire. Since it is still attacking I fire a second burst which finishes the Zero off. And then I pull up and look down to see if there are more targets around. But for now there aren't. I joined this fight a bit too late to see much action. So then I slowly start to make my way towards the island in search for another fight. But I try to stay close enough to teammates for mutual support if necessary. And after a bit I do see some tracers over the ocean and I can locate another fight. I am a bit higher again and this time I reach the fight right at the start. Again, I want to use the Spitfire's maneuverability and firepower to do as much damage as possible and, more importantly, keep teammates alive before my plane gets too slow. My team's planes were coming my way chasing a Japanese fighter or two, and I can see at least 2 enemy fighters slotting in behind them, so I pulled up to come around and dive after the 2 enemy fighters which are attacking a Hellcat. I get the Zero first and then get a good burst into the Hayabusa, which sets it on fire. One shot apparently also hit the Hellcat, but luckily it did not do much. Now I pull up again to look for fighters coming in behind us, and there is indeed a Hayabusa attacking a Typhoon, and I come around to go after it. I am soon joined by other fighters attacking the Hayabusa, and normally I would immediately break off and look for other targets here, but in this case I made an exception, because the Hayabusa is already firing on the Typhoon, and I was not sure if the Typhoon behind it could pull enough lead to get him off the friendly fast enough. But he did, and I go up to look for more targets trying to slot in behind us. And there is a Zero which came down to attack us from behind and going after me, which is the reason why I usually break off an attack if someone else is attacking a plane to look for another target to avoid situations like this. Now I can't outrun the Zero, but my Spitfire is maneuverable enough to keep the Zero from getting a shot for quite a while, and there are many friendlies around, so I call for assistance and go defensive a bit. And pretty quickly a Typhoon comes in and chases the Zero away, and eventually gets it. Now I'm a bit slow from maneuvering, as I've said the Spitfire Mark V loses energy pretty fast, but I can see 2 enemy planes a bit above me in front of me, apparently trying to climb after a friendly plane that soon climbed into the clouds above, and I go after them hoping I might get a shot at them while they still have their nose pointed up and are slow. One of them turns out to be a Zero, the other a Ki-61. I aim for the Zero first, but they run out of speed and start to dive down again. The Zero passed me. I don't think he's noticed me though, and I come around to get my nose pointed at him and fire a burst, which hits it and takes the Zero out. Now I look around trying to find the Ki-61 and I can spot it to my right turning towards me to attack, and I turn into him. We pass each other, and just as I look the other way to go after the Hien, a Ki-43 fly past me, and I switch targets and go after the Hayabusa instead. I can turn after the Hayabusa, I just have to be careful not to lose too much energy, and in this case I want to go after the Hayabusa first, because the Ki-61 can't turn with us, so it would be difficult for him to get a shot at me quickly. I get the Hayabusa and look around to see what the Hien is doing. He is turning after me, and with my better turn rate I simply keep my turn going for now, doing a bit of a high yo-yo turn to keep it as energy efficient as possible, though when turning this tight the speed is still becoming pretty slow. The Hien notices that he can't keep up turning with me and breaks off and reverses direction. As he comes back my way I fire a few bursts at him as he passes me, but the Spitfire is a bit unstable when pointing the nose up at this slow speed. I get a few hits but nothing to do real damage, and the Hien dives away towards its base. Now I am pretty slow from maneuvering, and the Mark 5C with its anemic engine settings would have trouble catching a Hyena in any case, so I can't get any closer. I tried to go for a few long-range shots, hoping with the heavy cannon armament I might do some damage or get the Hyena to turn when I get a hit. I do get a few more hits, but the Hyena keeps going and I'm running low on speed and my engine is in need of cooling down, so I break off and start to head back towards my own base to rearm. As I get close to my base though, I can suddenly spot another plane flying the same direction to my left a bit in front of me, and it's not British. As a matter of fact, it's a Zero closing in on our airfield. I guess he's trying to go after a Typhoon that is just landing there. So I change course and go after him. With my ammo being very low, I try to get as close as possible to him before opening fire. The Zero notices me though as I come in and turns sharply to the left. I of course don't follow the Zero in its turn. I can turn after a Hayabusa 3 Otsu, but not a Zero. I am however faster than the Zero and he lost lots of speed in his tight turn, so I can just climb up and get above him. I look back to see what the Zero is doing. He is keeping up his turn and coming my way again as I come down. So I place my crosshair along his flight path in front of the Zero and fire a burst as I dive down, and get a good hit. Pulling back up I can see the Zero is indeed damaged enough and going down, so I can go back to landing and rearming. After all, I have less than 10 rounds per gun left now. As I am on the ground and rearming, the Typhoon that landed earlier returned the favor by the way and shot down another Zero that was coming in to attack as I was landed. Now after I got back in the air and close to the fighting, I got some technical trouble though. I was just approaching a Typhoon and a Zero in front of me with a good amount of speed as my ping suddenly spikes and I lose control of my aircraft, and my nose is being pressed down and I am in a dive towards the ground. The situation resolves itself after a few seconds and I can pull back up just in the last second, but I lost the opportunity to attack the Zero while it was focused on the Typhoon and I lost all my altitude. Also the negative G from my nose being pushed down knocked my engine out and I need some time to get it going again, further reducing my energy state. So when I finally managed to climb back up and get back into the fight, I'm slower than I would have liked to be at the beginning of an engagement. I do however spot the Zero and the Typhoon fighting again, and I move there to attack the Zero as it is focused on the Typhoon. The Zero is turning to the right and I fire a deflection shot. I get hits but no major damage it seems, and I pull hard for a second shot hoping the cannons do enough damage to make it worth the energy cost, but still no major damage it seems and I pull up again. I can see a second Zero pass behind me as I go up, but it looks like he is turning away, so I decide to focus on the first Zero first, which is passing below me, and I hope I can get it out of the game quickly, but I don't get a shot at it as it pulls up into me. The Zero stalls though and gets into a spin, and I hope it's going down. But the second Zero is now behind me, so I call for assistance and go defensive, hoping I can give the Typhoon a good shot at the Zero. And the Typhoon is coming in and going after the Zero and eventually manages to shoot it down. Sadly, the spinning Zero manages to recover and is also coming after me, so I have to keep up defensive flying for now. Luckily, the Zero is also slow from its spin and low on energy, and I can keep him from getting a shot well enough, focusing a bit on roll rate in defensive flying versus the Zero, and soon enough the Typhoon after finishing off the other Zero is coming back in for another attack, and the Zero has to break off his after he sees the Typhoon coming after him. I go back up and try to loop in behind the Typhoon, covering him as I see a Hayabusa joining the fight, and I dive in behind the Typhoon. But I can't get around fast enough and the Hayabusa gets the Typhoon. I am now behind the Hayabusa though, but I'm slow from maneuvering, reducing my ability to maneuver now. I hope I can get hits on the Hayabusa though and get it out of the fight fast. Even though I am pretty slow, I can close in on the Hayabusa, and as it rolls around and dives away, I fire a few deflection shots at it, and I do get a few hits, but not enough to do major damage it seems. As the Hayabusa dives down, I loop up around, but I also have to keep an eye on the Zero, which is also turning that way, and as I focus on him for a second as I come around, I don't turn tight enough and give the Hayabusa an opportunity to fire. Now, as he comes past me, I come around again, and as I do so it seems I might be able to get a shot at the Zero as I come back down. But as I focus on the Zero, this Hayabusa gets a shot at me again, and hits and takes one of my wings off. So this is it for this fight, not ultimately successful, but a fun fight nonetheless I would say. Let's take a look at one more fight in the Spitfire Mark 5C. This one also takes place on the Guadalcanal map, and I'm looking for a friendly plane that has just called for assistance in this area. I eventually can see a few planes in front of me diving down. I'm assuming the one in front is the friendly and most of the ones behind are enemy. However, some of the enemy planes have a mid-air collision, so it seems there's only one plane left behind the friendly, which turns out to be a Spitfire. They are reasonably fast since they also dive down, but since I came down from higher altitude I am quite a bit faster and I can close in on the enemy plane S0 pretty fast and fire a burst from close range, which takes the Zero out and clears the Spitfire's tail. I pull back up after the attack to regain some altitude, but as I look back I can see quite a few planes behind me fighting in a pretty big furball, so I don't use too much time climbing and come around pretty quick to go there as fast as possible to help my team to hopefully get the upper hand. This fight seems to be taking place on somewhat lower altitude, so I can build up a bit of speed as I fly towards it. Now, as I move that way, I can spot the plane going the opposite way to my left, on slightly lower altitude, and it seems to be an enemy plane, but for now I feel helping turning the odds in our favor in that bigger fight I saw in front is more important, so I keep flying that way. Now, as I get closer I can see an enemy plane, a Hayabusa to the right of the fight, and it seems he's coming around to rejoin the fight, so I decide to go after this one. I could build up a bit of speed coming down from higher altitude, so I close in pretty quickly. As I get closer the Hayabusa notices my approach and starts to turn hard to the left. I pull up hard to get my sights in front of him and fire. I get a hit, but nothing major it seems. Now I can turn after Hayabusa at this speed without much trouble, so I go after him hoping I can take him out fast with my heavy armament. In hindsight I should have gone vertical and used my speed that way. I do get a few more hits on the Hayabusa, but not enough to take him out. He does have to leave the fight though at least. Now I have two Zeros behind me, which at first in the heat of the battle I misidentify as more Hayabusas, which is why I don't ask for assistance assuming I can deal with Hayabusas at this speed. I do a few barrel rolls and one of the Zeros is breaking off. The second one is still behind me, but under attack by Mark 9 Spitfire coming in for a diving attack. As the Mark 9 goes back up, he is followed by two Zeros, and I try to get a shot at one of them as they go up after him, but I lost more energy than I realized maneuvering, and I become a bit slower doing so, and I have to push my nose back down. The Zero tries to get a shot at me as I get too slow, but it seems he's run out of speed itself and passes to my left and goes into a climbing turn to the right. That gives me an opportunity to get my nose pointed at him. I come around, and this time, since the Zero is at a flatter angle from my point of view, I do have the speed to get a stable deflection shot, and I fire at him, getting a hit and taking the Zero out. As I come back down I see another Zero coming in behind me, but he is much slower and seems to have his gear out, so I can just outrun him. There seems to be a few enemy planes in front of me chasing a friendly, so I decide to try to get a shot at them as I fly past, but again there is a mid-air and I can't see any other enemy planes in front of me. So with half my ammo gone and my altitude low, I decide to simply make my way towards the base, attack targets of opportunity if I find any on the way, and otherwise simply land and reload. I did not find any other targets on my way back, and when I come back rearmed, there is only one other friendly plane left, the Mark 9 from earlier, and I find him fighting a Zero over the island. With the Zero distracted by the Mark 9, I go for an attack as he pulls up after the Mark 9. The Zero turns to the right as I close in, and I put my crosshair in front of him for a short-range deflection shot, which hits and sets the Zero on fire. And I pull up to trade my speed for altitude. Now the Zero does not burn for long though, and pulls up after me, but he does not have the necessary speed to get in range, and the Mark 9 coming back down finishes him off as he slows down in his climb. So with this Zero taking out, I level out and look around for more targets, and pretty quickly I can see an enemy plane coming in from the direction of the enemy airfield some distance away. I know it has to be enemy since the Mark 9 is the only other friendly plane and he is to my left. At first I see only one plane coming our way, but then it seems there's a second one on slightly lower altitude. I point my nose at the higher one and fly that way, and so is the Mark 9. The enemy plane turns out to be another Zero, and the Mark 9, being faster than me, reaches him first and attacks the Zero, getting his attention. Now after the attack, the Zero turns towards the Mark 9, which uses his speed to also come around fast. I use the opportunity to fire at the Zero passing in front of me after the Mark 9 is past it. I get a good hit and set the Zero on fire, and this time it does not go out and the Zero eventually goes down. Now I pull up and zoom climb above the burning Zero and look for a second enemy plane on slightly lower altitude I'm sure I have seen earlier. But I can't spot it now, so I expect it must have flown in a different direction after I focused on the higher flying Zero. I also want to keep an eye on the Mark 9 and stay close to him. With the enemy team still having more planes than us, I want to stay close to my teammate. It would be great if we could take out the other planes on the enemy team on their own in 2 versus 1 as well, but at least we want to avoid being caught alone by multiple enemy planes. Now the Mark 9 spots the missing enemy plane before I do. It's apparently over the coastline somewhat lower and flies there to attack, and I, now also seeing the enemy plane, follow. As I close in, the Mark 9 attacks the enemy plane, a Zero as it turns out from behind, and the enemy fighter starts to evade by going into a split S and looping downwards. I hope I might be able to get a shot at it again, as the Zero evades the Mark 9 attacks and does not see me coming, but the Zero turns hard to the right and I can't get the shot. Also, there was another enemy plane passing me, coming in from below as I approach the Zero, and I want to see what he is doing. I pull up and use my speed to get some altitude back, and I can see the enemy plane is trying to slot in behind the Mark 9. So I keep my eyes on the newcomer, and as he passes below me I dive down and try to get behind him and get him off the Mark 9's tail. As I come down I am pretty fast and I have to be careful not to turn too hard so not to break wings off my plane. So I can't turn hard enough to get lead and fire on the Hayabusa right away. I have to slow down a little bit first, but I do want to go right after the Hayabusa in this case and not go back up in the vertical, because I want to get the Ki-43 off the Spitfire's tail as fast as possible, and I can turn after the Hayabusa. Now the Mark 9 is going after the Zero and eventually shoots it down, and I close in on the Hayabusa, which apparently multiplied because there are suddenly 2 of them after the Mark 9. I aim for the rear one first as I close in and fire a burst, and I get a hit and it seems he is off the Mark 9, and I focus on the other one. I fire 2 bursts after him as I get in fire position. The first one misses, but the second one hits and sets the Hayabusa on fire, and he is eventually going down. I look back and search for the other Hayabusa, but I can't find him anymore. I expect that my hit has done some damage and he's moving back towards his base. And indeed, after a bit of looking around, that is where we find the last Hayabusa. The Mark 9 attacks him first, and I come in as he turns back around. I try to get a hit as he does so, but I miss my shots and I use my speed to pull up and gain some altitude again. The Hayabusa tries to climb for a second after me, but doesn't have the necessary speed to catch up and puts the nose down again, and as he does so, I come around to attack again. The Hayabusa dove all the way to the deck and is very close to the ground and slowly turning towards his base, maybe trying to go for an emergency landing. Now as I come down again I fire a burst, and this time I get a few hits, and after the attack pull up again. The Hayabusa keeps up its turn at first and then starts to move towards its base on very low altitude. I come around in a high yo-yo turn to get back into fire position behind the Hayabusa for one more attack. I fire a few bursts as I get close enough and get the critical hit this time, and the Hayabusa goes down. And well, that was the last fighter on the enemy team, and this is it for this fight. Well, that was the Spitfire Mark 5C. Certainly a fun plane to fly, as all maneuverable well-armed planes in War Thunder usually are. Still, I think he would deserve a proper Merlin 45 engine settings at the battle rating it is sitting right now, even with the slight reduction in battle rating it recently got. Well, and this is it for this video. I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.